Hello, hello, beautiful listener. My name is AP Mobley, and I'm your host here at the Myths and Folktales and Fairy Tales podcast. I'm also the author of dark fantasy inspired by mythology, so if you ever wanted to check out my books, I'd really appreciate it. Dr. Hyde and the Leprechaun, page 34 of The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by W.Y. Evans Wentz. One day, while I was privileged to be at Ratra, Dr. Hyde invited me to walk with him in the country. After we had visited an old fort, which belongs to the good people, and had noticed some other haunts in that part of Queen Maeve's realm, we entered a straw-thatched cottage on the roadside and found the good housewife and her fine-looking daughter both at home. In response to Dr. Hyde's inquiries, the mother stated that one day, in her girlhood, near a hedge from which she was gathering wild berries, she saw a leprechaun in a hole under a stone. He wasn't much larger than a doll, and he was most perfectly formed, with a little mouth and eyes, she explained. Nothing was told about the little fellow having a money bag, although the woman said people told her afterwards that she would have been rich if she had only had enough sense to catch him when she had so good a chance. I feel like I say this every time I record an episode, but I'm really excited to be recording this episode. This will be the first bonus episode of the podcast, but I should tell you, I don't think there's going to be a theme for the bonus episodes. They're just going to be kind of random. Like, I'd love to have bonus episodes where I have other authors who write books that are inspired by myths or folktales or fairy tales or all of the above. And I'd also love to have bonus episodes that are holiday inspired. Anyway, this bonus episode is one of those holiday themed episodes. It is, of course, the month of March, so the holiday in question is St. Patrick's Day. Other than Halloween, St. Patrick's Day is my favorite holiday. I love Christmas too, especially the movies and books and decorations, but Christmas as an adult can be extremely stressful. So as I get older, I find myself enjoying Halloween and St. Patrick's Day a bit more than Christmas because they don't cause me anxiety. However, I didn't always love St. Patrick's Day so much. When I was little, I actually didn't care that much about it. But that started to change when my parents moved my little brother and I from Nebraska to Wyoming to be closer to our extended family. And the change came about because my grandpa, Papa Don, was of Irish descent, and he loved Ireland, St. Patrick's Day, and leprechauns with every fiber of his being. He was such a vibrant person, full of life and love, and he talked about Ireland and leprechauns all the time. Then, of course, whenever St. Patrick's Day rolled around, he was absolutely giddy. His joy and love for this holiday was infectious, and he's the reason I love it so much now. Sadly, he passed away in June of 2024, but I know that wherever he is, he's doing a jig, eagerly awaiting March 17th. I could say so much more about Papa Don, but that's obviously not what this episode is about, so I'll start getting into the meat of the episode. As it says in the title, and as it was referenced in that opening quote I read you, we are talking about leprechauns, which seem to be the most iconic fairies from Irish folklore. But before we actually start talking about leprechauns, we need to clear something up. St. Patrick's Day technically has nothing to do with leprechauns or any other fairies, like, at all. Originally, St. Patrick's Day was an Irish Christian holiday. The holiday celebrated one of the patron saints of Ireland, St. Patrick, a missionary famed for helping spread Christianity to some of the pagan regions in the country. Now, there are a lot of fantastical legends about St. Patrick that have come to be over the years. Some of these legends say that he brought people back from the dead. Some say that he used shamrocks to represent the Holy Trinity. and some say that he drove all the snakes out of Ireland. Funnily enough, there already were no snakes in Ireland when St. Patrick arrived. So it's speculated that in the story, snakes are not really snakes, but are instead symbolic of pagans and pagan practices. Okay, so we've established that St. Patrick's Day is an Irish Christian holiday originally, but it is obviously celebrated around the world. And in many places, it's no longer about celebrating the actual St. Patrick and his missionary work. It's about celebrating Irish heritage. As I've said in other episodes, I am not a historian, I am not an expert, but from everything I have read, it seems that this shift for the holiday started in the United States after a lot of Irish people moved from Ireland to the US because of the potato famine. The American Irish people were heavily discriminated against, and they used St. Patrick's Day as a day to celebrate where they came from and their resilience in the face of adversity. So, the original reason for St. Patrick's Day has nothing to do with leprechauns. Yet, leprechauns have basically become the worldwide mascot for St. Patrick's Day. In my totally personal, totally unprofessional opinion, I think that this could be because leprechauns are a huge part of Irish mythology and folklore. There are countless stories of people who claim to have seen them. I mean, they are going nowhere. So, to me at least, it makes sense that during a time when Irish American immigrants were being discriminated against, that they would take this core piece of the folklore from their home country, from their culture, and use it to celebrate their heritage. Like I said, though, that is my totally personal, totally unprofessional opinion. And if you are more knowledgeable on the history of this subject, feel free to correct me in the comments. Now, like just about every other folkloric creature around the world, the leprechaun has gone through some changes over the years. When we think of leprechauns today, we think of tiny men with a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. We think of mischievous shoemakers that wear tons of green. We think of little fairies that, if caught by someone, will grant 3 wishes to said someone in exchange for freedom. But where did these iconic ideas come from? Where did the story of the leprechaun start? One mythological figure that leprechaun folklore could have come from is Lugh, a major god in Irish mythology. Lugh is a member of the Tuatha Danann. For reference, the Tuatha Danann are sort of the Irish equivalent to the Greek Olympians. Lugh is also a great warrior, the slayer of Balor, and he's the god of sunlight and craftsmanship and a bunch of other stuff. So basically, this leprechauns come from Lugh theory speculates that over a long period of time, Lugh was diminished from his role as this great god to this tiny fairy because he and the rest of the Tuatha Danann were sort of stripped of their godship and driven underground to the fairy mounds slash fairy forts. In short, as the Irish people abandoned the traditions of Lugh's pantheon, they might have seen Lugh and the other gods as less and less powerful beings, eventually reducing them to fairies rather than gods. A similar theory suggests that all Irish fairies, the East are descendants of the Tuatha Danann. This concept fascinates me, and it's the angle I took for my fairies in my upcoming novel, The Bone Fairy. The Bone Fairy is book 1 in my Children of the Death God series and is available for pre order. So definitely check that out if you're interested in reading a dark fantasy story where a post apocalyptic, nuclear fallout type world meets old fairy folklore and Celtic mythology. But Lugh isn't the only mythological figure that leprechauns could have come from slash could have been inspired by. One of the oldest stories that leprechauns are believed to have been referenced in is The Adventure of Fergus, son of Lete, where they are presented as these sort of little water sprite type creatures. In the story, our hero Fergus is sleeping, and the water sprites try to throw him into the sea. Unfortunately for the sprites, however, The freezing water jolts Fergus awake. He snatches up those little guys, and only after they grant him 3 wishes does he set them free. Fergus's wishes consist of breathing underwater, in seas, pools, and lakes. He's granted these wishes by the water sprites, but the power doesn't work in Loch Rudridge. Even still, Fergus tries swimming in the loch, but he's met with the monster Moidrish. The creature is so horrifying that Fergus's face becomes disfigured, permanently contorted with terror. He later slays Moidrish and dies of exhaustion afterward. I personally really enjoy Fergus's story because despite being so old, it has a lot in common with even the more modern stories about leprechauns. Obviously, one of the bits of leprechaun lore is that if you catch a leprechaun, you can demand 3 wishes from him or get the location of his pot of gold. But it's believed that there are sometimes negative consequences in doing so. One relatively recent example of this motif is the opening of the 1993 horror comedy film Leprechaun. That movie and other stories featuring leprechauns could be considered a warning against greed, and I would argue that Fergus's disfigurement is a result of his own greed. If he had accepted the limits of his power, he would have never come across Moidrish. Before I go, I thought I'd let you know that if you're interested in reading my free book, Wrath of Persephone, the link to download the ebook is in this episode's description. If you want more myths, folk tales, and fairy tales, I've also included the link to my myths, folk tales, and fairy tales blog in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.